All right, today we are jumping into this incredible story from 19th century Denmark. It's a story about crisis, but on three totally different levels. We're talking national, personal, and spiritual. And it all revolves around this one guy, Frederik. It all kicks off with the collapse of an entire nation.
I want you to just picture this for a second. It's 1813. The whole world feels uncertain. And your country, the very ground beneath your feet, is just crumbling. This isn't just some historical backdrop, okay? This is the first domino to fall, the huge, catastrophic event that shapes everything else that's about to happen. So here's how we're going to walk through this. First, we'll look at the kingdom's spectacular financial collapse. Then we're going to zoom way in on Frederik's own personal life, which was its own kind of chaos. After that, we'll see how all this turmoil led to a radical challenge against the church. And finally, we'll get to the vision for a completely new kind of faith that rose from the ashes.
All right, first up, the state bankruptcy. This was so much more than just a bad economy. This was the moment a nation's trust in itself just completely evaporated.
And this didn't happen overnight. Nope. It was more like a slow, painful bleed. You had these really ambitious reforms that were supposed to make everyone prosperous, but they just backfired spectacularly. The huge trading houses that were once the nation's pride, their vaults were draining until, well, there was nothing left. All that optimism from before was completely gone.
So what exactly went so wrong? Well, this slide basically lays out the perfect storm. You've got officials gambling with state money, just disastrous investments, and pretty soon a currency that people just stopped believing in. And look, this wasn't just about numbers in a book. This had real-world consequences, like the widespread hunger. We're talking actual famine that took hold in Norway.
And then, the thing that was supposed to be impossible happened. The state, the crown, the entire nation officially declared bankruptcy. Can you imagine? The very trust that holds a country together was just gone. For the average person, this was an absolute disaster, a failure on an epic scale.
And these two images side by side, they just perfectly capture the two stories we're telling here. On one side, you have the massive public disaster, a nation literally in ruins. And on the other, you have the quiet, private turmoil of Frederik, a man just trying to figure out his own life in the middle of all this chaos. So let's turn to his story now.
And that brings us right into our second act, Frederik's own personal crisis. Because let's be real, even when the world feels like it's ending, life and love, they don't just stop.
So get this. Right before the national bankruptcy hits, Frederik is thinking, okay, it's time to settle down, get married, build a future. But with who? He's standing at this huge personal crossroads, trying to make one of the biggest decisions of his life while his entire country is making its most disastrous one. The timing is just unbelievable.
And then, right in the middle of all this national chaos, a letter arrives that is just a lightning bolt of personal crisis. It's from a woman named Laura, and her words are just so raw. I miss you. Why did you leave me here? Wow, you can feel the history and the heartbreak in those lines. This clearly wasn't some simple love story. It was messy and full of pain.
And Laura wasn't the only one in the picture. He was also writing to another woman, Marie Blitcher, getting letters from a Mrs. Loth. His personal life was this really complicated, tangled web of connections. He was desperately searching for love in a world that felt completely unstable. In a way, his country was bankrupt, and his own heart felt pretty bankrupt too.
So what do you do? What do you do when the state has failed you and your personal life feels just as broken? You might start looking for answers, for comfort, somewhere else, maybe in a higher power. But that brings us to the third crisis, a deep challenge to the one institution that was supposed to provide that comfort, the church.
This rebellion got a name, the Kætterkirken, which basically means the Heretic Church. But here's the thing you gotta understand. This wasn't a physical building with a steeple and pews, not at all. It was a revolutionary idea. It was a movement pushing back against what many saw as the cold, lifeless, and totally inaccessible rules of the official state church.
This slide just lays out the conflict so clearly. On one side, you've got the established church. Think monotone Latin services that nobody could actually understand, a faith that felt trapped in black letters on white paper. But on the other side was this heretic vision. It looked back to ancient storytellers, to bards and skalds. It was about a living spirit you could feel through art and poetry, something that made you feel genuine warmth and safety. And here's the absolute heart of the problem. What good is a message if no one can understand it? The church was speaking a language, both literally and figuratively, that the average person couldn't connect with. That light of the letter, the official dogma, it just wasn't enough to actually light up their lives.
So, if the old church was broken, what was the alternative? This is where we get to the final and maybe most hopeful part of our story, the vision for an entirely new kind of spiritual community.
And the vision they came up with was, well, it was both radical and beautiful. It started with this core belief: words have power, real power, the kind of power that ancient bards and druids had. The next step was to use that power, through things like song and poetry, to create real feeling, to bring warmth into a cold world. This meant moving beyond just priests who enforced rules and instead embracing artists and poets, the people who actually create meaning. And the ultimate goal? Get this: a church of poetry, a spiritual home built not on rigid laws, but on shared human art and creativity. And this is such a key point. This movement wasn't just about swapping one set of beliefs for another. No, it was way bigger. It was about giving art and poetry and culture a brand new role in society as the main way people could find meaning and connection.
So now you can see how it all connects, right? The failure of the state, the pain of a broken heart, it all created this huge vacuum. The old ways of doing things were gone, and into that empty space stepped this powerful new idea that meaning doesn't have to be handed down to you. It can be created through art and the power of the human spirit.
And so Frederik's story, even though it's from the 19th century, leaves us with a question that feels incredibly relevant right now. When the institutions we count on start to fail, and when our own hearts are breaking, where do we actually find true meaning?